Welcome back to the Explainer. So, if you've got a child in Germany, or, maybe you're planning to have one in the future, there's this one specific phrase that strikes equal parts absolute hope and sheer panic into every parent's heart. Yep, I'm talking about getting a Kita place. For expats and locals alike, securing childcare is basically a legendary rite of passage. It usually involves enough physical paperwork to build a small fort. But hey, don't worry, because this explainer is going to serve as your ultimate survival guide. We're going to decode the bureaucracy, take away the panic, and get you fully prepared. It's a sentiment we literally hear constantly from parents trying to navigate this system. The process can feel like a full-time job. And look, your stress is completely valid. Between the seemingly endless waiting lists, navigating all that dense paperwork from the Jugendamt, and figuring out complicated income calculations, well, it's a lot to take on, but take a deep breath. We're going to break the whole shebang down into really manageable, actionable pieces today.
So, here's our game plan. First up, the essential document checklist. Second, we'll tackle the big question, how much does a Kita cost? And finally, a step-by-step roadmap to actually land that spot.
Okay, let's dive into this first major hurdle, the paperwork. As you probably already know, German bureaucracy absolutely loves its documentation. And Kitas are no exception to this rule. You really need to have a specific set of documents physically ready, like in a pristine folder, before you even think about signing a contract. Right, let's start with your personal and residence papers. First on the list is your child's Geburtsurkunde. That's the birth certificate. And this is vital. If it was issued abroad, you absolutely must have an official English or a certified German translation. Next up, you're going to need the passports or ID cards for both parents. And finally, your Anmeldebestätigung. This is your city registration certificate, and it's strictly required because it actually proves to the Kita that you live in their specific municipality. Now, beyond personal IDs, the health requirements are incredibly strict. Before your child can step foot in any childcare facility, you've got to prove their health status. The first requirement listed here, the Impfung, or measles vaccination, is completely non-negotiable. Because of a change in German law back in 2020, you must show proof of this in your vaccination booklet, which is known as an Impfausweis, before day one of Kita. You'll also need your U-Heft, which actually brings us to our next point. So, the crucial thing here is understanding this little yellow book called the U-Heft. For expats, this is a uniquely German system, and let me tell you, they take it very seriously. It's a mandatory pediatric health booklet that tracks all of your child's developmental milestones and completed medical checkups. It starts from U1 right after birth all the way up to U9. The Kita basically needs to see this to ensure your child is totally up to date on their age-appropriate health evaluations. Finally, to round out your document folder, you need your financial and work proofs. You're going to need an Einkommensnachweis. That's your proof of income. This usually means handing over your last 3 pay slips, or if you're self-employed, your tax assessment, which is known as the Steuerbescheid. You'll also need an Arbeitsbescheinigung. That's a certificate from your employer or university proving that you work or study. And here's a pro tip. Proving that both parents are employed or studying is heavily weighted in the system. It often grants you absolute priority for those highly coveted full daycare spots. Okay, so now that your folder is perfectly organized, we need to transition to the really big financial question. How much does childcare actually cost in Germany? Well, the short, somewhat frustrating answer is it depends entirely on where you live. German states have wildly different laws when it comes to Kita funding. Seriously, there is a massive contrasting pricing across the country. For public and subsidized Kitas, the cost can range from completely free to over 400 euros a month. In states like Berlin or Hamburg, public spots are legally free, regardless of how much money you make. But if you're in states like Bavaria, North Rhine-Westphalia, or Baden-Württemberg, the fees are calculated based on your household income, the daily hours you need, and the child's age. And just a heads up, a Krippe, which is for kids aged 0 to 3, is much pricier than a kindergarten for kids aged 3 to 6. Then you've got private Kitas and parents' initiatives known as Elterninitiativen. Private tuition can easily range from 500 euros to well over 1,200 euros a month. Elterninitiativen usually have lower fees, but they function as a co-op. So you're expected to contribute volunteer time, or taking on administrative tasks, or even cooking the kids' meals. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this specific number, 100 euros. Always check for state-specific subsidies. For example, this 100 euros represents the monthly Beitragszusens that the state of Bavaria offers to parents. It's a direct subsidy applied to your childcare fees for children over 3 years old, which significantly lowers your out-of-pocket expenses. But I've got to give you a quick insider warning here. Even if you're lucky enough to live in a state where tuition's completely free by law, you have to beware of the Nebenkosten. These are the hidden extra costs that you absolutely must factor into your monthly family budget. Because, as we all know, nothing is entirely free.
So, what's the biggest hidden cost? Well, you're looking at about 50 to 120 euros a month. This is the Essensgeld, or meal fee. Even if the care itself is technically free, the Kita is almost always going to bill you separately for the daily hot lunch and the snacks they provide to your child.
All right, you know the documents, and you've got a handle on the costs. It is time to move into the execution phase of this explainer. This is where we actually take action. We're going to walk through a really clear, actionable roadmap to ensure you finally secure that place for your child. Here is your chronological timeline. It really comes down to these 4 overarching steps: navigating the municipal portals, applying for a voucher if your city requires one, taking the initiative with direct outreach, and finally, surviving the acclimatization phase. Let's break each one down so you can visualize exactly what you need to do and, more importantly, when.
Step 1 is all about urgency. You literally need to apply early. The very moment you have a birth certificate in hand, you should be registering on your city's official online portal. Depending on where you live, this might be called the Kita-Navigator, the Kita Finder, or something along those lines. Do not delay this step. Getting into the municipal system officially timestamps your need for childcare.
Moving on to step 2. Now, this applies if you live in a city that uses a voucher system, like Berlin or Hamburg. You need to apply for a Kita-Gutschein at your local youth welfare office, the Jugendamt. You should aim to submit this paperwork roughly 3 to 6 months before your desired start date. Think of this voucher as the government basically telling the Kita, hey, we agree to pay for this child's spot for this many hours a day. Step 3 is where you really separate yourself from the crowd. Direct outreach. Seriously, do not just rely on those online municipal portals. You've got to take the initiative. Start calling, emailing, and physically visiting private and church-run Kitas directly in your neighborhood. Introduce yourself, express your keen interest, and explicitly ask to be placed on their private internal waiting lists. Sometimes, just a polite follow-up call is what actually gets your application pulled from the bottom of the pile. And finally, step 4. Let's say you get the contract. Congratulations! But remember, your child is not going to start full-time on day 1. You absolutely must plan for the Eingewöhnung. This is a very structured 2 to 6 week acclimatization phase. During this time, a parent stays in the room and then gradually just stays nearby while the child slowly adapts to the new caregivers and their new environment. Honestly, it's a bit like going back to kindergarten yourself for a month. You will definitely need to take time off work for this, so make sure to plan your parental leave accordingly. So, we've covered a massive amount of ground today. Get that folder perfectly organized, understand your local costs, and start that direct outreach as early as possible. But it does leave us with a bigger question to ponder. Is this highly subsidized, incredibly localized, and heavily bureaucratic system the best way to support working parents? Or is it just a maze that's desperately in need of modernization? Something to think about as you start organizing your own paperwork. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and I will see you in the next explainer.